With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. President Trump announced on Truth Social that joint U.S.-Israeli strikes killed Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, describing it as justice for victims of his regime and the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country. President Trump called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history and praised intelligence tracking that enabled the operation. Russian President Vladimir Putin mourned Khamenei as an outstanding statesman who strengthened Russian-Iran ties, condemning the killing as a cynical violation of morality and law. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem vowed retribution against U.S.-Israeli tyranny. Israel's military claimed the strikes also killed 40 top Iranian officials, including Armed Forces Chief Abdul Rahim Mousavi. Neither Iran nor the U.S. immediately confirmed the deaths. 3 U.S. service members were killed and several injured in escalating conflict with Iran following President Trump's launch of Operation Epic Fury. U.S. Central Command confirmed the deaths, withholding identities pending family notification. Iran retaliated with missile and drone strikes on U.S. bases in the Middle East. The conflict is expected to last weeks, though President Trump said operations are ahead of schedule. Prominent Republicans, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, criticized the war as unnecessary and contrary to President Trump's campaign promises to end foreign conflicts, while others like Senator Lindsey Graham urged intensifying efforts against Iran. President Trump said Operation Epic Fury has eliminated at least 48 senior Iranian officials. Israeli forces reported killing at least 40 key commanders, including Armed Forces Chief Abdul Rahim Mousavi and other top officials. Iranian state media confirmed multiple members of Khamenei's family were killed. U.S. intelligence reportedly tracked a rare leadership meeting, prompting coordinated daylight strikes that dropped 30 bombs on Khamenei's compound. President Trump also said U.S. forces destroyed 9 Iranian naval vessels and damaged naval headquarters. Despite heavy losses, Iran formed an interim council government and said constitutional procedures are underway to appoint a successor. At least 9 people were killed and around 20 wounded when pro-Iranian Shiite protesters attempted to storm the U.S. consulate in Karachi, following U.S.-Israeli strikes. Hundreds surrounded the consulate, with some breaching the main gate, smashing windows, and entering the driveway before police used tear gas and opened fire to disperse the crowd. Clashes continued into the afternoon. Large demonstrations also erupted elsewhere in Pakistan, including in Skardu, where protesters set fire to a United Nations office. Protesters chanted anti-U.S. and anti-Israel slogans and called for revenge. A gunman wearing a shirt reading "Property of Allah" opened fire outside a crowded bar in Austin, Texas, killing 3 people and wounding 14 others before being shot dead by police. Authorities said the suspect, a U.S. citizen originally from Senegal, had materials indicating a possible link to terrorism, including a Quran and clothing with Iranian imagery. The shooting occurred hours after U.S.-led strikes on Iran amid warnings of potential retaliation. Police said the gunman fired from the street using a handgun and rifle. Investigators have not confirmed a motive, and identities have not been released. British Defense Secretary John Healey declined to state whether the UK supported the US-Israeli strikes on Iran, saying Britain played no part and that Washington must explain its legal basis.
On Iran, we share, however, the primary aim of all allies in the region and the US that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon.
But do you believe this action was within international law?
Well, we play no part in the strikes. We just didn't participate, and it is for the US to set out the legal basis of the action that it took.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
Right now, somewhere in Nigeria, there's a Christian family being persecuted. Those who are not killed are often forced to flee their homes. At Equipping the Persecuted, they're committed to reaching every affected area and help heal the deep physical and emotional wounds that have been inflicted upon them. But they can't help them without your support. So please visit equippingthepersecuted.org and donate today. Sign up for just $35 a month. It's a little over $1 a day, and you'll help rescue Christians who are suffering and provide security, medical care, food, shelter, and love. The situation is urgent, so I'm asking you to join in the next 10 minutes. It's a life of fear and danger for these Christians, but for just over $1 a day, you can change everything. Go online to equippingthepersecuted.org and make a difference in the life of a persecuted Christian. That's www.equippingthepersecuted.org.
Hi, my name's Michelle Tankey and I'm the volunteer manager at the Lost Dogs Home. We've got 145 incredible volunteers that help us with a wide range of activities, including helping out in the laundry, taking dogs for a walk, doing activities with our enrichment program, administration, gardening, you name it, they're helping us around the shelter. Whether it's blowing bubbles to entertain kittens waiting for adoptions or even taking a dog for a walk, it's such an incredible positive impact on the animals. Volunteers are so important and special to this shelter because they support us in caring for thousands of animals each year. The impact they have enables us to do far more for the animals than we would be able to. For example, we can get on top of the huge amount of laundry we have. So the volunteers allow us to clean thousands more blankets than we could. It's incredible the amount of gifts that we're given by the public. We're so grateful for it. So if we get some toys, we can give them directly to puppies straight away to play with, or towels, we can take them to our vet hospital for them to use immediately. So it's a really important job to help staff with. I would say to someone who's interested in volunteering to please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. We have an application form on our website that you can fill in, so please just detail all your skills and experience you can offer the shelter, and we'll be in touch when a suitable role comes up.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Welcome back to the World Today for a Monday. Good morning. If you're in the UK, it's 8 after 7 in the morning. Gold Coast and Queensland, Brisbane, it's 8 after 5. And for New South Wales and Victoria, it's 8 after 6. So drive home carefully. Now, Toby Young noted in his post on X that the Greens' win in Gorton and Denton was not a grassroots surge, but a slick NGO-backed operation, as claimed by CCDH Watch, where billionaire tech and money, tactical vote nudges and dodgy polling combined for a narrow, legal but troubling win. Hannah Spencer, a 34-year-old plumber and Trafford councillor running for the Green Party, secured 14,980 votes, or 40.7% of the total, defeating Reform UK candidate Matthew Goodwin in second place with 10,578 votes, and pushing Labor into a distant third. Historic first for the Green Party, an inaugural Westminster by-election win, and its first parliamentary seat in Northern England. However, according to CCDH Watch, beneath the story of a grassroots revolt against the Labor government lay a sophisticated four-vector intervention. Let's talk to our panel about this. It's going to be sort of broken up this time. We'll have two at the start, and then Bernie will join us a little later. And we'll talk about the influences played out in this by-election. What is at stake and at the general election? And isn't it incumbent for the British public to get off their backsides and turn out to vote if they care about the direction of the country? I think more than 52% did not turn up to vote. Our guest initially, Mohammed Amin, MBE, Director of the Campaign for Shared European Values, and Councillor Alan Cook, Politics and Technology Consultant. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. First of all, Mohammed, what's your overall view? What's your, if you could just explain the lay of the land, how you see it?
Good afternoon, Mike. First of all, I live only about 3 miles away from the constituency. My sister lives in the constituency, so does my niece and her family, and it's an area that I know extremely well. My family, sister, niece, they were very concerned about Reform UK, as indeed are many people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and what they didn't know was who was the best party to vote for to keep reform out. I mean, it's quite clear that in this country there is a significant anti-reform majority, but if that splits, then of course with first past the post voting, unlike what you have in Australia, reform could come through the middle. And I said to them, I wasn't sure between Labour and Green. I personally am a member of the Liberal Democrats, but the Liberal Democrats are going to be nowhere in this election. So the last thing I wanted my sister or niece to do was to vote Liberal Democrat. And I said, wait to see what the polls are like. We'll get a feel as the campaign goes on about who's got more energy, who's got more vibe. But I was leaning towards the Greens, partly because I was aware just how unpopular Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are in Britain right now. So I advised my relatives to vote Green. I don't know for certain whether they did or not, but I'm pretty confident they probably did. And what was interesting looking at the overall result is that actually, even if the anti-reform vote had split exactly evenly, Reform would still have lost. They were not going to win this election because it's a constituency that fundamentally leans against reform. But the voters, the non-reform voters, needed to decide amongst themselves, do they support Greens or do they support Labour? And even though this is historically a strong Labour constituency, the Green candidate, Hannah Spencer, the plumber, was far more charismatic than Angeliki Stoyer, the Labour Party candidate. So I was not surprised when I heard the result on Friday morning at all. Many people seem to have been surprised just because the Greens have never won a by-election, but they needed to think about the actual circumstances on the ground in this constituency.
Alan, were you surprised or were you expecting a close result, which wasn't that close? Between Reform and Labor, it was close, but it wasn't close with the Greens. What's your views on the outcome?
Good morning, Mike. Well, pretty much the result was what I expected. Not that I'm actually rather good at predicting these things, but you tend to go where the bookies place it, and people aren't going to risk their money on a whim. So the bookies pretty much called the result the way it ended up. But that constituency is, out of the 650 in the UK, that was a 440th best seat. So it was way down the bottom. We shouldn't really be doing anywhere near as well as we did there. So what it does show is that when we do eventually get the general election, we should get pretty much a landslide victory, which will actually reflect what's showing in the polls. We are the largest party in the country by membership. And we've been polling in the lead now, considerable lead, for well over the last 200 polls in this country. What I can't understand is why Mohammed seems concerned about reform. We are a very popular political party. And, we were out canvassing in Bromley yesterday, and afterwards we all stopped for a drink. And at the table, there was someone from Singapore, someone from China, an English guy, someone from Kiwi, and someone from Ukraine, who's actually another sitting councillor. So, we are a party of immigrants and different shapes, sizes, sexuality. And it's concerning and worrying that people seem to have a different view. I think the constant attack by the media and the extreme left, we do have problems with extreme organisations in this country, and it's getting more and more obvious what their tactics are. We got organisations like Stand Up to Racism and Hope Not Hate, who are really well-funded extremist organisations that basically are attacking our democratic system, and it's working. For a long time now, they've been calling my party racist without any evidence or fact. And you wonder, why do they keep doing this? And, I'll ask you a question, Mike. Would you go down the pub and have a drink with someone you know is a racist? You probably wouldn't, would you? But would you go down to the pub and have a drink with someone who's got a slightly different political view than you have? And you may actually agree with some of the things they say. You may actually like some of the things they say. You never know. You might end up joining them and even voting for them.
If they were shouting, I'd go down.
That level of conversation is what they're trying to stop. They're trying to stop any conversation, because then people then realise, actually, we're the good guys. All of our policies are based on common sense. And that's, there's a lot of worrying trends in British politics at the moment. And I'm not that concerned about the Green Party, because when people actually look at their policies, I was up in canvassing in Manchester. When we were telling people on the doorstep what the Green policies were, they were laughing at us and saying, go away, that's not the case. That's not true. You're making it up to try and stop us voting Green. When you mention that they want completely open borders, people look at you thinking, no, that's not their policy, but it is. They want to legalise all drugs, crack cocaine for your kids, heroin for anyone who wants it. It's, it would be utter chaos if they get any sort of hold in this country. And, they used to be a party of the environment. Now it's just communism masquerading as, environmentalism. So when people actually see that, when people actually start looking under the surface and see it's not actually a Green party, but it is a communist party, people will stop voting for them.
Mohammed.
Where does one begin? The Reform UK is led by Nigel Farage, a man who single-handedly has caused more harm to the UK than any other politician I can think of, from the way that he spearheaded Brexit, which has made our country poorer and less secure.
Your facts are incorrect.
It's a party that seems to attract an enormous number of racists, which it finds it then needs to expel.
Where are your facts?
How long do I need to go on?
I'm sorry, you're talking rubbish. If we're going to have a conversation, at least stick to the truth. Brexit,
I do.
No, Brexit, if we used it properly, would have been, an economic massive hit for this country. But we got part of the Brexit, but we never had a government that actually wanted to utilise it. There's a survey that said, 4% of the economy was destroyed by Brexit. If you look into it, that was actually a prediction and it never happened. So it's all part of the Project Fear. And I actually stood for the Brexit Party in 2019. So I've done a lot of research on this. Europe is a stagnating market. All the growth is outside of Europe at the moment. So what we should be doing is doing, better deals outside of Europe. Still trade with Europe. We're actually doing more trade with Europe now outside of Brexit than we were when we were a member of the EU.
You sound just like those communists who always say, communism is great, it's never been applied properly. The Office for Budget Responsibility is talking now, not forecasting, it's estimating that our country is about 4% poorer than it would have been if we hadn't left the European Union. That is the government speaking, not me.
Yeah, the OBR has got just about every single thing they've ever predicted wrong. Of all of the organisations predicting the financial future and what's happening, they are the worst of all of them. And that 4% figure has been disproved.
Given the choice between you and believing
about a year ago, quite a while ago.
I stick to the Financial Times.
Oh, well, that's your problem. You probably watch the BBC as well. If you want bias, that's the way to go.
There's no
Have you
way of
noticed at the press conferences when the FT asks questions of Nigel, more often than not, he'll just move on to the next people because the questions are ridiculous. The last time he said, well, actually, I'm not going to answer that because you're going to write whatever you want to write anyway. It doesn't matter what I say. So, the FT is not a reliable source as far as I'm concerned. They're too political. I'd rather get my news from an unbiased source. So I dip into a little bit of everywhere.
Mohammed.
But anyway, we don't have to agree. This is all the fun of English politics. People have different stances, different positions. But, let's try and talk the truth. You said we've had racists expelled from the party.
Yes.
This is untrue. We may have had one or two. If we find them, they go. No ifs, no buts. But, our party is scrutinised to a level that a political party has never been scrutinised before. The BBC, if one of our councillors gets removed or quits, it's reported 96% of the time. If the same thing happens to one of the other political parties, it's reported 16% of the time. So everyone always hears about one of our councillors that gets kicked out, whereas if it's any of the other parties, they really never hear about it. All the institutions that have got things to worry about us coming into power are worried, and they're attacking us.
Can I ask you, Mohammed, I just want to pop in here, why were the Greens right for the electorate?
First of all, because Labour is extremely unpopular at the moment nationally, and it's particularly unpopular amongst Muslim voters, especially due to the way that Keir Starmer has handled the conflict in Gaza. Muslims still haven't forgotten that a few days after the 7th of October 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel, Keir Starmer said in an interview when he was asked the question that it was okay for Israel to cut off food, water and medicines from Gaza. It then took him, I think, 12 days before he corrected himself, recognizing, of course, that would be a serious breach of international law, as well as being deplorable humanitarian policy to correct himself. Starmer has lost, and the Labour Party have lost a lot of support amongst Muslim voters who historically have predominantly voted for Labour because of the way that Starmer has led the Labour Party on its positioning on Israel and Gaza.
Alan?
I do get a number of people asking me my position on Gaza through my job as a councillor. And my reply is always the same. It's not actually in my ward. And, I'm a local politician. My views really are my views, and it's irrelevant to the job as a councillor in London.
Can I ask both of you, and I'll stay with you, Alan, for 1 second. What was the main reason why Reform lost to the Greens?
Well, the Greens got more votes, Mike. That's why we lost. But as I said, that is our 440th best seat, and to come second. People want change. The Labour Party led on the fact that at the last general election, people want change. Vote for change, vote Labour, vote change, and they said it over and over again. But what people didn't realise was it's actually change for the worse, not change for the better. So you need to be a little bit more careful when you pick your political slogans in future, I think. But people do want a choice outside of the two parties which have pretty much ruled this country for hundreds of years. And so the Greens are an option, as is Reform. That's the only two real options. The Lib Dems have been in power and with the Tories and made a bit of a mess of it. So all three of those parties are tarnished. And so people want another option, and that's what the Greens and that's what Reform are actually giving them. And in some way, Brexit actually broke the political left and right sort of fight in English politics, because the Red Wall, we had an awful lot of the centre left and the centre right voting for Brexit, and so since then the left right has never really quite been that well defined in this country. So the politics now are really going towards patriotism. Are you a global socialist, or with the Greens communist, or are you someone who really wants to put the UK first, a UK-centric party that looks after the citizens of this country? Mm. And that's where we are, I think. You're patriotic or you're a global socialist. And that's the new battle line, I think, in British politics. And, obviously the Labour Party is a socialist party. And as Mohammed said, the socialists, he said communists, they always think their version of socialism is going to be the one that works. Rachel Reeves thinks that her little tweaks to that ideology are going to be what makes a difference. And this time, socialism will actually work in a capitalist economy. It won't. It never will. But they all believe that their version is the one that's actually going to do the trick. So that's my sort of take on it. Is we're moving away from left and right, because the majority of our support is from the centre left and the centre right. So we are taking Labour voters, we are taking Conservative voters, and so we're actually quite a centric party.
So are you saying, Alan, that the Greens haven't really got the best interest of the UK at heart? If you are, that's what I think you're saying. Can I just swing back to Mohammed? Mohammed, would you like to reply to that? Because I find it, by the way, I am agreeing with you, Alan. However, I find it quite discouraging to think that you have a political party out there who are sitting representing their constituents, and really they don't care a whole lot about the UK. It'd be like someone sitting, for example, in a seat in Australia and not caring about Australia. And funny I might say that, is that this is happening now. There are politicians who don't really care about Australia. What they want to do is change it. And I see that happening, and I do agree with you, Alan, I see that happening in the UK, that they want to change the UK. So, Mohammed, the Greens, sure they won. I think there are other things at play here. But can you just tell me what you think? The Greens, I know you voted for them, and you were supporting them.
No, I didn't vote for them.
No, I checked myself then. I was supporting you. You were supporting them. So tell me, if they, and I agree with what Alan's saying. I don't think they have the UK's best interest at heart. They want to change. They want to change the UK from what it used to be. What do you say to that?
Two things. First of all, anytime politicians try to claim a special hold on patriotism as if they are more patriotic than their opponents, you should distrust them. The leaders of all our political parties, from Jeremy Corbyn to Nigel Farage, I accept that all of them are motivated by patriotism, and they are equally patriotic regardless of what I think of their policies. I never trust any politician who claims special sort of patriotism. Now, coming back to the Greens, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I think Green policies are ridiculous. I think they are extremely left-wing, and I don't support them. The point was that in Gorton and Denton, when my sister wanted to know which party was more likely to keep out Reform UK, in a situation where the big concern was that the anti-reform vote would split evenly and allow reform to come through the middle, I said vote Green, and I don't regret that in the slightest. As it turned out, even if the vote had split perfectly evenly, there was still so many anti-reform votes in Gorton and Denton that reform would not have won. But do I support Green policies? Absolutely I don't, any more than I support Jeremy Corbyn's policies on your party. But that doesn't stop me believing that Jeremy Corbyn is a British patriot.
Well, yeah, I agree about Corbyn, because he's a very good politician. I don't agree with his politics, but he's a man who stands by his principles, as does Nigel. He doesn't flip-flop, he doesn't change. Corbyn has been saying the same thing for decades, as has Nigel. So these are principled politicians. We have Starmer at the moment, who seems to have no principles at all. He's directionless, rudderless, and just tends to swing with whatever public opinion is at the time, or the U-turns when he's forced to do the U-turns. So they're very different styles of politicians, and I would say Corbyn wants to actually ensure that this country is successful, but in obviously in a different way than we do. But he was anti-EU as well, because he understood that if we're not actually in control of our own country, then he can't create his socialist utopia here. You actually need control to actually do the things you need, the changes you need to create your ideology on this country. And so, yeah, he was very anti-EU.
Can I ask you, both of you, I'm sorry for jumping in, Mohammed, who was a winner? I'll give you, was it the Greens, the real winner? Was it the Greens? Was it Reform? Was it Labor? Or was it apathy? Because more than half of the constituents in this election did not vote.
Mike,
But they did not vote. And so if you don't have, I don't like compulsory voting, but it makes people go out. It doesn't mean the results will be a whole lot different. And we would describe that as apathy. And do we have apathy throughout the UK? Because we were talking about it today, that there are many, many people who are complaining about the way the UK is heading. In this election, you had only a 47.62% turn-up. And that's deplorable, considering that the UK is in such a terrible state, and yet you have less than half the turnout to vote.
Mike, this is one of those cases where your Australian perspective distorts your understanding of the UK, because you do have compulsory voting. In the UK, 47% turnout in a by-election is a high turnout.
But it's not a high turnout after all.
No, let me finish. It compared to the average turnout, decade after decade in British by-elections, 47% is a pretty high turnout. It's only a few percent, about 3 percentage points lower than the general election turnout in this constituency in 2024. Because this has historically been a safe Labour seat, turnout has not been particularly high. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the 47% turnout. I've been following British politics closely since I was 10 years old, so 65 years ago. And this is not a low turnout for a by-election in a UK constituency. Would I like turnout to be in the 90s? Of course I would. And if you wanted to propose compulsory voting in the UK, I would support that. I would also like to change over to the Australian voting system, by the way, with your ranked choice voting, because I think it's a much better voting system than we actually have. But this was not an apathetic election. This was a highly motivated election. There was an enormous amount of campaign activity on the ground by Labour, Green, Reform. The other parties didn't bother. The Liberal Democrats had a very sort of low-key campaign because there was no national effort put into this constituency. It would be wasted time, effort, and money. But this was not an election showing large amounts of apathy. Quite the contrary. By British standards, this was a highly engaged electorate with a high turnout for a by-election.
I disagree entirely. You had a low turnout. Alan?
Well, for local government elections, it tends to be around about the 30% mark. For parliamentary elections, it tends to be around the 60% mark. But different constituencies, as Mohammed said, will actually have, historically different numbers of turnouts. And yeah, it is because if it's a very safe seat, the opposition tends to not bother voting, and actually to a degree the people who know that their party's going to win potentially don't go out as well. So you do need to look at the historic figures to actually work out if this is a normal or high or low turnout. Anything under 50% is, democracy is not really operating the way it should be, as far as I'm concerned. And it would be nice to get further engagement. All the parties that had a potential to win. That's Labour, Greens and Reform did throw a lot of effort into this. The Tories didn't. They actually lost their deposit, which is absolutely unheard of. So, and this was Labour's sixth safest seat. So for them to come third there, it's really not looking good for Labour and Tories for all of the upcoming votes. On 7th of May, we have the votes across Wales, Scotland, various councils up and down the country, and the whole of London. All of the 32 boroughs will be voting on the 7th of May. The Tory party, in its demise, by the looks of it, will actually cease to be a national party at that point, because they'll pretty much get no support in Scotland or Wales. So we are seeing a huge change in English politics. We haven't had a rise of a party like Reform for 100 years now. So this is it's a very exciting time to be involved in British politics at the moment.
The reason why I mentioned, because ever since Labor got in, we have had the loud voices of UK politics and just people, commentators saying it's the worst government ever. We have to get rid of them. It's the worst ever. So you would say, okay, here's a chance for you to put your vote to good use. Go out there and vote, because it's the worst government ever. And you had 47-something% turn up. So I understand entirely what you're saying, Ellen and Mohammed. But if it's the worst government ever, the country's going to lose its culture, it's going to be invaded by immigrants, blah, 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 then you turn out and you make sure that doesn't happen. But you had less that turned out, and that's my point. Can I just ask you, Mohammed, about family voting?
Yes. In the UK, we have law, the Representation of the People's Act, which prohibits people going into a polling booth more than one at a time, apart from those situations where somebody has a certificate that to demonstrate that they are disabled, for example, if you're blind, and somebody is allowed to go in to assist you. But apart from that legally permitted exception, which I think actually requires a certificate, it should be one person in the voting booth at a time. And to the extent that small numbers, because the numbers themselves are actually pretty small, people are going in more than one at a time, it's up to the people there on the ground running the election in charge of the polling area to say, no, you can't do that. And it's discouraging that they're failing to insist on the rules every single time. Did it make the slightest bit of difference to the result? No, it did not.
Bernie de Helverding, thank you for joining us. Could you tell me, before we get into some more specific questions, just your thoughts about the by-election?
That's a broad question. I suppose. Good morning. I suppose I would say that I'm not entirely surprised, although disappointed. I guess I was hoping for a Reform win, and I think that generally speaking, I think the mood of the country is more towards a Reform win than it would have been to a Green win. Particularly as I think it's very unclear what green means these days. I think we have a view traditionally that green is something to do with the environment. I'm not sure that it's possible to know really what green is under Zach Polanski, whose policies seem to be somewhat close to fiction. So it's a disappointing result. I think it's certainly a bit of bad news for Labour. Though again, I think if they were realistic, they wouldn't be entirely surprised by it. But it does seem to me to be of concern, because I don't see that the policies of the large migrant community fits with the things that Zach Polanski stands for. So I see some tension there, which may be a break on the future support. It seems unlikely to me that historically, with the tradition, perhaps that voters that come from Islamic countries might have, the notion of same-sex homosexuality and the notion But I mean, just all the policies that Zach Polanski espouses don't seem to fit into what one understands to be the core policies of Islamic voters. So and I suppose cynically, the concern is that that's being played by Zach Polanski in order to get votes, much the same as Starmer has played towards the Islamic community to ensure their continued votes. So I don't see it as a sustainable policy.
Alan, family voting, what's your thoughts?
Well, we're having more and more corruption in our voting system. I think I really first noticed it at Peterborough by-election many years ago, where postal votes was the big issue there. We had 14 people registered to vote in a 2-bedroom flat all over Peterborough. And there was actually a legal case brought against the result, but that didn't actually get anywhere. So from that point on, we realising postal voting is too easy a way of basically cheating. So, it's easy to coerce people if, the man of the house gets all of the postal votes, fills them all in, gets anyone else there to sign it, and there you go, you've got 10, 12 votes. With the family voting, yeah, it's against the law, but have you been in a polling station recently? Have you seen the people behind the desk? Most of them are probably in their 80s, and how are they going to stop big burly young men from bundling into the voting bays? It's not part of their job. They can advise, but they can't actually stop it from happening. We don't want police in every polling station, and we don't really want to be arresting hundreds, thousands of people every time there's a general election. So what they need to do for the family voting would be to basically have a physical restraint. So it literally is one in, one out, and then the problem goes away.
What about tactical voting, Alan?
Well, it's something we're going to see more and more of. The sectarian voting, the tactical voting. It's a worry, but to a degree, it's always been there. But nowadays, with the internet and specific sites set up for tactical voting, it's a lot easier for people to actually find out which way to vote to keep someone who they dislike out. So Mohammed has openly said he quite happy to do whatever's possible to keep Reform from winning. So for whatever reason, we're just pretty much a centre-right party. How far left do your policies have to be for you to actually actively dislike another party to that degree? Yesterday we had one councillor from a different party screaming and shouting at people as we were leaving the building to go canvassing, and that is normally what we'd see from the hard left parties, the fringe parts of the Labour Party and the Lib Dems. They tend to be quite aggressive, but this guy was a sitting councillor for the Tory party, so I think they're now realising that the game for them is up and they've lost, so they're getting verbally aggressive, like the extreme left as well. So it's making Reform actually look like the only sort of adults in the room at the moment from what is happening, to us, not just by the press, but activists and these organisations that I've already mentioned, Hate Not Hope and Stand Up to Racism. We are seeing more extreme swings in British policy.
Mohammed, you're very determined to stop Reform. Can I ask you why?
Yes, I think it's a deplorable party with deplorable policies. It promotes sectarianism, division in our society. It's quite clear to me that Reform does not like people of my background in the UK. I know you have Zia Yusuf in the leadership. I've listened to lots of interviews by him. I still don't understand why he's there and what he sees in Reform. But I think Reform UK is a deplorable, harmful party, full stop.
Well, I'd say the complete opposite. We, if anything, are actually pulling people together. We're unifying. we want everyone to celebrate our history, heritage, our culture. I live in London, and it's an amazing city, and it's because of our history here, the empire, the Commonwealth, and it's a great melting pot of different cultures. But Layla Cunningham, she's a Muslim. We've got just about every religion represented in our party. When I stood for the Brexit Party, it's some of the places and times we would go out, I'd be one of the only white people there. So, and we were called racist at that point as well. You need to actually have some facts for these things to stick. I think people are getting pretty bored of calling us fascists and racists. We're certainly getting bored of it, and it just doesn't stick anymore. You actually need some facts rather than just say, oh, they don't like me and my type. Well, a lot of people in the party are of different ethnicity to myself, and they are very, very passionate about reform. I think it all depends on where you get your information.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mohammed. You can I just a quick answer to this one? Do you who would run the country better, Reform or the Greens? Just who would? No, but truly, who would?
That really is the choice between Scylla and Charybdis. You have two awful parties, both of whom have terrible policies. I don't think much of today's Conservative Party, but I'd much rather have Conservatives or Labour running the country than either of them. Of course, the party that will run the country best is the Liberal Democrats.
Bernie, you've been sitting there quite polite. Sorry about that. What are your...
I've been itching to say something. Well, I think on the point of sectarianism, I think this is a very difficult allegation to put to other democratic parties in the UK, when we're seeing the Islamic community wanting to introduce some form of blasphemy law by default. Now, if that isn't sectarianism, what is? We have free speech in this country. It may have been eroded a lot since Starmer became Prime Minister and a bit before, and it continues to be. But we still have it, and it is absolutely everyone's right to criticise people's religions or not criticise them. It is, the recipient's right to be offended. That is, as long as we do it the civil way, as long as people don't break the law by inciting violence, it's all very clear. And to suggest that the police should stop people, Christian preachers, from preaching Christianity on street corners, that is completely anathema to the UK. So I find it concerning that the party of the left, which accuses the parties of the right of being fascist. I mean, who are the people who are introducing these laws? It's the left that's introducing them. Fascism is coming in from the left, not the right.
The future, again, while you're here, Bernie, I mentioned before that I thought it was a very low turnout because you are aware that organisations such as our own and GB News and others have been up in arms and saying that the UK and its culture is dying very, very fast. We're being invaded, so forth, and goes on and on and on. So for the first time ever, it's the worst government ever. Were you surprised? I mean, Mohammed and Alan weren't surprised. I am, because they weren't. But were you surprised at the low turnout because of the issues that are confronting the people of the UK at the moment?
Yes, I mean, in relative terms, 47% is in modern terms is not a low turnout, unfortunately.
But because of the circumstances.
Yeah, indeed, because of the circumstances, I find it extraordinarily low. I haven't seen an analysis of the demographics of who came to vote. One would have hoped that more younger people are now a bit more interested and are coming to vote, but I haven't seen any analysis of that, so I can't comment. I don't know if anybody else has, please say, but I haven't. But yes, it is low, and given the circumstances, it should be a lot higher. But I think that speaks to the ennui that people have of voting for systems that they no longer believe in, and that's a cause for the need for political reform. As you know, I'm a direct democracy campaigner. It says so in my label, and that is, I think, the way that we move forward to this. That we the only way we can move forward is by going back to completely local policies and local communities electing parliamentarians and council members based on what the locals need and what the locals promise, as opposed to any form of national policy, and moving away from party politics and more into local politics, as the Swiss democratic system does, which Nigel has actually also supported in many speeches in the past, and they're easily findable on the web, as also Restore Britain and also Advance UK support. That is the only way out of this, and I think it's the fact that voters don't believe they're being listened to and don't believe they're being heard, and much disillusioned by the current government, which has done the opposite of pretty much everything it's promised. I mean, if you've ever read the book 180 Degrees, I recommend it, but it basically says, assume that whatever policy is being promised, the opposite will happen. I mean, that's exactly what's happened under the Starmer government, which has hugely disillusioned many, many more voters.
How do, Alan, just first of all, looking at reform, how do you engage the voters? How do you get them to start caring about their country? Because, I do sound like a broken record, I do admit that, but it was a low turnout considering the implications of what a low turnout would do. So, and if you had a higher turnout, would reform have gotten through it? I mean, a lot of people stay at home and they think, no, reform will win this, or that party will win this, and heavens above, it doesn't happen that way. So you obviously need to get the voters out, feet on the ground, go to the booths, go and vote. How do you engage the public to do that? How do you get them to, instead of sitting home and whinging and complaining about the worst government ever, how do you get them to do something about it and go and vote?
Well, outside of the normal political get out to vote actions that all the parties do on voting day, there's nothing you can do. I think people are disenchanted with politics because we haven't had any really good administrations for about 30 years now. So, and Labour government would normally inherit a well-run economy from the previous Conservative government, but that actually hasn't happened this time. So what we are in is like a double trough, because the Conservatives tend to turn the economy around. They tend to reverse the constitutional damage of the previous Labour Party. But the last Tory constitution, were parliamentary-wise mainly probably Lib Dems. The One Nation Tories certainly weren't small c Conservatives. So we've seen, global socialism from the Tory parties after a socialist government, and then followed by another socialist government. So, British politics and our economy is in a bit of a sad way and place at the moment. So I think the only thing really that's going to excite people enough is an alternative to all the previous administrations, and that is what they're getting from the Green Party and Reform. But a lot of people aren't engaged with politics. As I said earlier on, they do not know actually what the Green Party policies are. The total open borders will destroy the country within a year. They are very much pro the gender ideology, which doesn't really sit very well with the Muslim community either. So, I can't understand what their draw is, and they're not UK centric. They campaigning, they were talking about Gaza most of the time. So I think it's just people who are not really engaged in politics want somewhere different to vote. If they believe all the rhetoric from the left, then they're not going to come to Reform. If they do a little bit of digging, then they actually see that our policies are basically based on common sense. Prisoners should be, hey, guess what, in prison. People who break into the country illegally, hey, shouldn't be in the country. There's nothing racist or fascist about that. That is just good old common sense and doing what the other parties should be doing as well.
Mohammed, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I want to come back to the point we've discussed several times already. By British standards, this was not a low by-election turnout. And no matter how unpopular Starmer is, everybody voting knew that this was not going to cause a change of government. For the Labour Party, this has been a very damaging by-election to lose. I think it really harms Keir Starmer. The real problem for this Labour government is that they won a general election, but they hadn't worked out in advance what they actually wanted to do. All of the focus from the Labour Party was on winning. Morgan McSweeney, the guy who led the campaign effectively, is a great campaigner, but he's not the person to sort out what the plan should be. Starmer himself is unable to communicate a clear message and a clear vision, which is why the government is floundering. The Liberal Democrats have been doing extremely well in council by-elections since then. Last year, in 2024, we won 72 MPs, and we expect to advance over the coming years, starting this summer in the local council elections.
I need to ask. I'm going to ask you all your thoughts on the Iran thing, Bernie. What's your views? I mean, and Starmer is a very poor prime minister. We all would agree. But what's your views, Bernie, on Starmer's blocking of the use of Diego Garcia to the Americans, and then the late approval of a couple of the British bases in his late response to an ally, that being the US?
Classic Starmerism. I mean, the decision was a precursor to another U-turn, number 17, I think. I think we begin to see the pattern. It's first of all cleaving to this mythical concept of international law, which apparently is meant to be binding on us, and then realization that, oh, actually, I probably can't do that. And I think possibly in between some conversations with the White House, which may well have been slightly more robust than in the past, and may well have signaled a change of relationship if that sort of cooperation wasn't there. But nothing that should surprise us, everything that should continue to shock us.
Mohammed, what do you think?
The Iranian regime is a detestable regime, and I would like to see it gone. Mm-hmm. However, there is no legal basis for the current Israeli and American attack on Iran. And in the long run, it will make the world a more dangerous place, because if Israel and America can do it, why can't China? Why can't any other country that's got sufficient armed forces in the area concerned? And you're simply making the world a more dangerous place. International law developed for very good reasons. And this attack, in my view, is unlawful.
Alan, you know the question, but before we get into that, it's also interesting that we've had many soldiers and of senior position with their own forces globally, and all say that when politicians start dictating the terms to how a war goes and which direction it moves, it will come apart very quickly, because all wars have their own mind and they will go in whatever direction it wants to. So besides the first thing on Starmer and Diego Garcia, I'll throw one more in for you there. Do you see this being a long war, a long conflict? Because at the moment, I don't see any budging from Iran with the new regime, and all we see at the moment is chaos increasing globally.
Well, I've been actually involved quite heavily with the Chagos Islands and helping the people who've been behind all the sort of the legal aspects, the High Court case, the setting up the government in exile, and it is an act of harm to this country to actually not just give away the Chagos Islands, but to give it away with a dowry. It's as we discussed earlier on, it is not in the best interest of this country, and I think Starmer, his ideology comes first, and not the what is best for the country. So I'm glad that for now that's been paused, even though officially it hasn't. But there's lots going on in the background, and the Maldives possibly coming in as well to try and slow things down a little bit further. Trying to block the use of the base is ridiculous. Why is it there? Why are the Americans there on an English island if it's not to be used? So no, this is classic Starmer, as Bernie said. And the war, I don't know. I think my comments at this point are probably irrelevant because I do not have the information that the American High Command has, and I think we need that information to actually know if this war is warranted or not. You know, was there new imminent threats? We pretty much know that Iran has been the axis of evil for a long time. Were they going to up their game? You know, is this strike well timed? The answer, I do not know.
It's a really tricky one. I agree with bits of both of what you've said there. I agree with Mohammed that I don't think we should go around the world decapitating regimes. It doesn't end well, and the American record on it is not great. It's always it's a bit like, you know, I mean politically now rather than figuratively. If you decapitate Starmer, who takes over? It might not necessarily be somebody better, and that's certainly true of those regimes. So I would agree that I think it is not the best way to move forward on this, and I can see. Very rarely find myself agreeing with any thought process of Starmer's, and I'm not even sure I can imagine what that might be. But assuming there's some hesitation on similar lines of thought, I can see why he might have thought maybe I don't really want to support this. Vetoing the use of the base might not have been the best way to signal that, particularly with the likelihood of a U-turn happening shortly thereafter. But I agree with Mohammed. It's a very distasteful regime. And there seemed to be not a lot that was able to move it onto the back burner or even off the hob completely, other than some sort of direct action. Whether that was the best direct action or not remains to be seen, but I have my doubts. Historically, the record of the US doing this is not great, and it does put at risk communities in the diaspora of Western satellite countries and supporters, as we've seen over the last few days, which adds fuel to the fire on the one hand, but it's also a recollection of causative, what caused it, what started this off. And you can always start the clock wherever you want on that argument, but it certainly would not have reduced the tension towards the West from Iran. And the retaliatory actions taken. We saw this morning the Akrotiri base in Cyprus that was hit by Iranian drones, which I suspect shows that, as is so often the case, the UK military is not ready. Drone attacks are nothing new. If we haven't got our bases protected against drone attacks already, then there's a problem. Those drones, if they were drones, they shouldn't have got through. But there's the more cynical part of me that wonders. And if you look at the history of the US and the history of regime change and the history of protagonists that lead to it, there's the cynical part of me that wonders how much of some of these counterattacks are actually driven or paid or funded or inspired by the CIA itself to warrant further action. We've seen, again, I'll refer you back to the book 180 Degrees, and many others. There's plenty of stories in there which are well evidenced that show that actually the cause for some of these wars is our own intelligence agencies. When I say ours, I mean the West's, and predominantly the US and Mossad, CIA and Mossad. So it's very hard to know where the truth lies, but the history of the US, as I say, in regime change is not a good one.
You'd have to be nervous if you're a world leader when the President of the United States calls you and says, let's have a conversation about something. Because he's not terribly, as you're having a conversation, he says, look, why don't you all go to a particular room and we'll continue. So, and it doesn't, but, you know, taking away the jocularity, it doesn't do international relations one iota of good, and it makes you trust less the President of the United States, who would like to describe himself as a man of peace, and I'll bomb the crap out of you if you disagree. Mohammed Amin, MBE, Director of the Campaign for Shared European Values, thank you for being with us. If somebody wants to find out more about you or the organisation, how do they do that?
The easiest way is to Google either my name or the organization's name. That's better than trying to memorize the URL of our website, cscb.org.uk. We stand for the values of people like John Locke, Voltaire, the French Enlightenment, and those values really matter around the world. They're at the heart of our society. They're not exclusively British, they are European.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Alan Cook, if they want to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Well, you can Google me or literally just go to the reformuk.com website.
And Bertie, thanks for being with us and thanks for turning up. If somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Yes, I'm sorry I was late. I had to deliver one of my children home.
That's right. All under.
So you can find me at Gilt Elephant, so Gilt GILT_elephant on X, and Gilt Elephant without the underscore on YouTube. Having been banned from LinkedIn years ago for suggesting that Boris Johnson was introducing totalitarian laws into the country. Those are the two platforms I'm still on, surprisingly, although YouTube is a recent one they've perhaps allowed me back on or something. So that's where I am mostly.
I can't stand when YouTube, Rumble, X and Facebook. We still have history because of TNT, and driving me nuts. If you know of anything, I mean, if you, where can I send them chocolates? Maybe not. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. By the way, I'm half serious about that.
Thank you.
I want them to love us. Thanks very much to everybody. This has been the Protagonists on the Wall today. We'll catch you same time, same phone booth tomorrow. Take care and drive carefully.